like, you know, maybe some of your other pieces are 1 page, but these ones could be like 2 to 4 pages. But you can balance that with the fact that they're fun to learn. So it's something to consider. So anyway, that covers, in a nutshell, every repertoire selection for an exam, if you're doing RCM or ABRSM. And you don't have to use this as an exam reference. If you don't do exams, that's fine. You can still kind of use this as a general idea of what different categories there are and what different song types, piece types that you're expected to. So anyway, let's go move on to the other important categories. So next in order of importance is technique. In the RCM, grade 3 is the first grade that you're expected to do 2-octave, like hands together scales, which is a little bit of a learning curve at first. Before this, it was all hands separate. So aside from those new scales and triads and formula patterns and different keys, the only other new thing to the RCM technique in grade 3 are 2-octave triads. So it's still hand separate, HS for hand separate, but instead of going 1 octave like you did in grade 1 and 2, now you're going to go 2 octaves. In the ABRSM for grade 3, you need to be able to play your scales hands together and separately. So that's actually what you did in grade 2 in ABRSM, so it's not a major change. The other major change, well, I guess really the only other major change is that there are now some hands together arpeggios, which are a little more challenging. So we've talked about the repertoire, we've talked about the technique, and that's going to make up the majority of your learning and your practice, but there are 2 more important categories that I don't want to overlook, and that is sight reading and ear training. So sight reading, I've got the RCM up right here. Basically, it just involves reading a little bit of a song, like a little bit of a piece and a fragment on the piano off the cuff. Like the examiner will pop some music in front of you, give you a few seconds, and then, you know, you're off to the races. The RCM sight reading for this level is actually, I think, quite a bit easier than the ABRSM at this level. You only have to do a 4-measure passage, whereas in the ABRSM, you have to do a playback up to 8 measures, and you're going to be using slightly more unusual keys than these. Like you could have to, you know, read a piece in E flat major, for example. But with the RCM, you have the additional hurdle of doing a sort of a rhythm reading. So the examiner will put a rhythm in front of you, and you're going to have to, like, you know, tap your toes a steady beat, and then, you know, with your hands, you're going to have to tap, like, the rhythm that you're reading in front of you. So you have to read a rhythm, and you have to read a piece of music on the piano. Then we have the ear tests. So in the RCM, you have to listen to the examiner play something and clap back the rhythm, and you're going to have to be able to identify these different interval distances, so like minor and major thirds, perfect fourths and fifths, and you're going to have to be able to tell the difference between major and minor chords, and be able to tell if, you know, they're playing a root note or the third or the fifth of the chord. They're going to play like an individual note after they do the chord, and you have to do a playback. So that just means the examiner plays something and then you have to copy it back. For the ABRSM, it's pretty different actually. I mean, you have to clap back a tune, and that's pretty similar, but you also have to do a sing back where you echo a tune that the examiner plays, just as kind of like a pitch challenge. They'll also do they'll play something twice and they'll change something the second time, and you need to figure out what they've changed. And then you're also going to need to, you don't have to do a playback like with the RCM, but you do have to do a listening exercise where they're going to play something and then they're going to ask you questions about it. So finally, I want to finish by talking about percentages, and we're going to start with the RCM and then with the ABRSM. This is really, really, really similar. Actually, it might even be identical, if I'm remembering correctly, to grade 2. So if you remember that video, we're going to kind of be looking at the same thing. So in RCM, all of your pieces are worth 56%, and they're pretty equal. Your list A and C are worth 16%, and then your list B is worth 18%, to a total of almost a passing grade, which is 60. Your technique is out of 24%, so that's 12% for all the scales and stuff, and then the 2 studies are worth 12% each. And then you have ear tests and sight reading, which are each worth 10%, and the passing grade is 60%. The main difference between this and the RCM is the total marks are out of 150, whereas with the RCM, the total marks are out of 100, okay? So you have 3 pieces which are each 30 marks. So all of them together are going to be 60% of your overall grade. Then your scales and stuff, 14%. Sight reading is 14%, and ear tests are 12%. So the weighting is actually the weight of the marks are a little bit different than the RCM. Okay, let's just take a look at the syllabus one more time here before we wrap this up. I just want to show you, there's, in the syllabus, I'm looking at the RCM one right now, but the same is true with ABRSM. There is a big song list of all the different pieces you can play that are at a grade 3 level in each category, like list A, list B, list C. So check that out if you're looking for new pieces to learn. There's a couple different things you can do. You can buy the specific grade 3 RCM or ABRSM books, because they have like a nice diverse collection of all the pieces, and then you don't have to like pick and choose. You don't have to, you know, spend a bunch of time figuring out what pieces that you can learn, because they're all going to be in one book and they're all going to be at the right level. And here's what that looks like in the ABRSM. You have a way smaller song list choice, so even if you're just doing an ABRSM exam, I would still encourage you to look at the RCM syllabus, just if you're looking for more pieces to learn. It'll give you a few more options that you know are going to be at the right level. So the other thing you can do, if you don't want to buy the RCM or ABRSM books, like the official books, what you can do is you can buy the individual books that some of these pieces come from. So for example, you're like, man, I really like Anne Crosby, she's pretty cool, and she has a book called In My Dreams, and all 4 of these pieces from In My Dreams are at a grade 3 level. So you might want to buy that book, or you might want to buy, I don't know, Lyric Waltzes by Glenda Austin, or whatever. I really like doing that because it'll lead to a more interesting piano book collection, which I think is kind of fun, and it also helps to diversify just beyond the standard pieces provided in the grade 3 books. And that is all for today's video. I hope you found this useful. I kind of made this video with the intention of, if you're doing a grade 3 exam, you can kind of review this to make sure you're on the right track with everything. Maybe it'll give you an idea of some pieces you want to learn. But even if you're not doing exams, I feel like it's kind of helpful to have a sense of where you are. So even for my students who don't do exams, I like to give them a sense of what grade level they're working through, and kind of still go through the grades. It's like, I kind of like treating piano a little bit like school in that regard, because I feel like it's nice to have that sense of structure. So anyway, I will wrap this up here. You can come hang out with me on social. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. And we're linked below in there if you want to, come hang out. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. You can give it a like if you enjoyed it. Thank you for everyone who helped make these videos possible. Thank you so much for watching. Catch you guys next time.
Привет, Алиса. Hi, Alice.
What does the A stand for?
You're here.
Advanced Backed Royal Conservatory of Music. No. Okay, I don't know.
Hey. You're good.
Hi, and welcome to today's episode of GUBAEVEVGENIY. So today I wanted to sit down with you guys and talk about grade 4 piano. We're going to specifically talk about grade 4 in the RCM and the ABRSM, and we're going to talk about how the examination process works. But even if you have no interest in doing exams, this should still give you kind of a framework if you're teaching yourself, or even to give you a little bit more of an understanding of what your teacher's doing when they're assigning you stuff. So we're going to talk about the different song categories. We're going to compare the RCM to the ABRSM. We'll talk about technique, sight reading, ear training, pop music, all that good stuff. So let's get started. Just to give you a sense of timeline, if you started taking piano lessons as a child, this would probably be about your 6th year of piano. Grade 4 roughly corresponds with your 6th year. And it's about half of that if you're an adult student. So 3 or 4 years generally is when you hit grade 4 as an adult. It depends on how much you work. Grade 3 was the first intermediate level piano grade. So everything before that, the preparatory stuff, grade 1 and 2, that's all beginner level. So grade 3 was the first step into intermediate repertoire. And because of that, grade 4 is very similar to grade 3 in terms of what you're working on. It's just more so. So in grade 3 you start sonatinas, for example, and that's a huge hurdle, and a lot of people struggle with that at first. In grade 4 you're still doing classical sonatinas, they're just a pinch more difficult, things like that. So intermediate level is between 3 and 6, and then once you hit grade 7, that's when you would be considered more of an advanced student. I find grade 4 to be a really, really exciting point in any student's piano learning journey, because in grade 3, everything's a little bit overwhelming. Like grade 3 is a tough year just because the level jumps up quite a bit when you're going from beginner to intermediate, and it's the first year with sonatinas, and that, like I said, it's a big challenge. But by grade 4, you've had a year of that challenge under your belt, so you feel a little bit more ready to tackle those difficult challenges, and the music starts sounding a little bit more rich and more like real piano music, not just like little kid music. So that's really motivating. I find a lot of students tend to start blossoming around this time. Grade 4 RCM and grade 4 ABRSM start to diverge in terms of difficulty. So they're not entirely equivalent, though they're close. Ultimately, RCM grade 10 is equivalent with ABRSM grade 8, and it's right in the middle around grade 4 where things start to split. So in general, ABRSM grade 4 is a little more difficult than the RCM. You don't have to learn as many pieces, so in a way that part's easier, but pieces at a grade 4 ABRSM level range from grade 4 to 7 level in the RCM. So the pieces themselves tend to be just a little bit more challenging. When you're doing a Royal Conservatory grade 4 exam, you need 5 pieces though. So you need 3 repertoire pieces, just like the ABRSM, list A, list B, list C, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But you also need to learn 2 etudes or studies. In grade 4, the RCM and ABRSM both have 3 categories for pieces at a grade 4 level, list A, B, and C. So we're looking at list A right now, and they're a little bit different in each system. List A pieces in the RCM are Baroque dances. Baroque, it's one of the older eras of music. There are some minuets, just like in grade 3, but there's a lot more pieces in general from Bach's Notebook for Anna Magdalena. This is a classic repertoire collection, and you should definitely pick it up if you're an intermediate student. It's a gold standard. There are other dances at this level, including marches, musettes, airs, and others. There's also a couple Telemann fantasias at this level. Baroque pieces at this level are written in contrapuntal style, which is 2 voices. So they're often really challenging studies of hand independence. This basically just means that instead of the left hand simply playing chord patterns, both hands are playing simultaneous melodies. So over on the ABRSM, list A merges both Baroque and classical repertoire, but there tends to be like a much stronger lean towards classical repertoire. In this section, you're going to see movements from a Haydn sonata, you're going to see Van Hal, Kuhlau, and Clementi sonatinas as well. I say this every time, but list A is almost always the most difficult category for students. Classical and Baroque pieces are the oldest styles we learn on the piano, usually, and because of that, they're the most unfamiliar, and they usually require the most dexterity and hand independence. Next up are the list Bs. In the RCM, this means classical and classical style repertoire. This is where you're going to find all the sonatina movements by Clementi, Diabelli, Gurlitt, and many others. There's also a few other classical selections that aren't sonatinas in this list, like Beethoven's German Dance. I think there's a couple German dances at this level. I can't remember exactly. But sonatinas are challenging compared to other repertoire at this level, like list A's and C's even, because they require a blend of really important but sometimes technically challenging skills and techniques, like being able to play fast scale passages, being able to do cadence patterns, and accompaniment styles like Alberti bass. When I was learning piano, well, I still am, but when I was like at the early stages of learning piano, I was always frustrated by the challenges of classical music like sonatas and sonatinas. These would be the pieces that I tended to procrastinate on the most, but once I was able to play them, they're usually really, really fun. Like, there's lots of variety, they're often really fast, they take a while to perfect, but they end up being really great show-off pieces once you get them. So over on the ABRSM side, the list B choices are a little different. Since ABRSM's list A was Baroque and classical music, list B is Romantic era, which is 19th century music. Romantic music is generally really well loved because it's expressive and because it's much more similar to modern music because of how chord-based it tends to be. Hoffmann's Scherzo is a well-known tune at this level, though it's actually very difficult. The RCM puts it at a grade 7. We also see Schumann's Merry Peasant from his Opus 68 album for the young, and then from Tchaikovsky's album from the young, we have his Mazurka, among others. Finally, we have the list C's. They're pretty similar between the RCM and ABRSM. They both focus on modern 20th and 21st century pieces, but the RCM also includes romantic pieces in this category. in the RCM syllabus, this is an absolutely huge category of music. There's over 100 selections to choose from. So in addition to pieces from Schumann and Tchaikovsky's collections, which we talked about previously, along with other Romantic era composers, you're going to come across modern genres like jazz and blues. You're going to find mood pieces and character pieces. This is the category for guys like Christopher Norton, and then like Martha Meir, Mike Schoenmel, some of my other favorite modern composers like that. Though the ABRSM's music selection is generally, well, not even generally, is always much smaller, the List C category covers a diverse range from jazz to traditional tunes to early 20th century composers like Kabalevsky. Regardless of whether you use the ABRSM or RCM, though, the List C category is generally the most loved category of the three. The Royal Conservatory of Music requires a fourth and fifth piece to be learned, and these are called studies or etudes. These are just pieces designed around a specific technical concept, like, say, for example, light staccatos, working with fifths, chromatic scales, stuff like that. They vary really widely in style, so they could be old pieces or pretty new pieces. They could be quirky sounding or more traditionally song-like, anything in between. This is the category where you're going to encounter composers from Czerny to Bartók, all the way to modern composers like Schoenmel and Gillock. The fifth and optional category in grade 4 piano RCM are pop pieces. And I don't like to omit this category because it's just a really fun category. It's fun to learn pop music. There is a separate pop syllabus for the Royal Conservatory, which is on the screen here, and I've linked it over on the blog. But basically, if you do an exam, you have the option of substituting one of these pop songs on this list for one etude. So you can play a pop song that's either at your grade level, so in this case 4, or the grade immediately higher, grade 5. And that gives you lots and lots of interesting, awesome music to choose from. You have lots of fun choices in this category, everything from really, jazzy standards like Fly Me to the Moon to rock music like Aerosmith's Dream On, which I guess is the Glee version, to, Mary Poppins, to Christopher Norton. There's tons of good stuff to choose from here. So all of that is, in a nutshell, every repertoire selection for an exam. So let's move on to other important categories when you're looking at grade 4 piano in the RCM and ABRSM. First, let's talk about technique. RCM grade 4 sees us continuing to do 2-octave hands together scales in major, melodic, and harmonic minor keys. Just like in grade 3, there's a 2-octave formula pattern to contend with, but the one for grade 4 is obviously more challenging. This time it's in a harmonic minor pattern as opposed to a major pattern. The biggest changes, though, from RCM grade 3 to 4 are that the triads are now played hands together, and arpeggios make their first appearance. This is the first time that they appear in the syllabus at all. You don't have to do arpeggios in RCM grade 3 or anything like that, but they do appear earlier in ABRSM. With ABRSM technique, you also need to be able to play scales hands together in the form of melodic, harmonic, and major scales. One big difference from the RCM, though, is that you also need to be able to play them hands separately. Unlike the RCM, there are no triads at this level in ABRSM, just hands together and hands separate arpeggios. And the biggest change between grade 3 and 4 here is that all of the arpeggios are to be played either, like both, hands together or hands separately, and same with the chromatic scales. So we've talked about the repertoire and we've talked about technique. That makes up the majority of your learning and practice, but there are 2 more important categories that we shouldn't overlook, and that is sight reading and ear training. Sight reading involves basically reading a fragment on the piano off the cuff. The RCM sight reading for this level is quite a bit easier than the ABRSM sight reading requirements. Expect what you sight read to be 4 measures long in common major and minor keys like C, G, D, and F major. And then the minor keys would be A, E, and D. With time signatures that are simple, common times like either 3/4, 4/4, and the rhythm won't be any more complicated than 8 notes. You also need to sight read a rhythm for the RCM grade 4 exam by tapping a steady beat based on something you're reading. This is also going to be 4 measures, but the rhythm is going to be slightly more complicated, just because you don't have to actually play it on the piano. You're going to see up to dotted 8th notes and 16th notes here. Then we have the ear tests. In the RCM, you have to listen to the examiner play something and then clap back the rhythm. You have to be able to identify interval distances. You have to be able to tell the difference between major and minor chords. You also need to be able to pick out specific notes in that chord, like the root, 3rd, and 5th. And finally, you'll have to play back a short little ditty that the examiner plays. These are generally like one-handed, they're really short little excerpts. For the ABRSM, you'll do a melodic playback by imitating something on the piano, just like the RCM, or you have the option of doing a melodic sing-back, which is, instead of playing on the piano, you sing what the examiner plays on the piano. New to grade 4 is being able to sing 5 notes a cappella, so no accompaniment, from a score. So the examiner is going to like play an opening chord, and then you listen to that chord so you get the key in your head, and then you have to kind of just freeform sing something from music. The examiner will play something on the piano and then ask you some questions about it. And then another thing in this test, in the ear exam, that kind of sounds like, that sounds like a doctor's appointment. In the ear portion of the test, you'll do a clap back. So the examiner will play something and then you clap the rhythm back. Finally, let's talk percentages and how if you take an actual exam, they're going to be graded. So we have the RCM and the ABRSM on both sides. So starting with the RCM, these percentages are actually the exact same as they were for both grades as grade 3. So there's nothing new or different here from the previous year. The list B piece in the RCM is worth the most. It's worth 18% of your overall mark, where the other two are worth 16. And an extra 6%, this is like an easy bonus, an extra 6% is awarded for memory, which is 2% per song. That's something that you don't see in the ABRSM. All the techniques, so scales and stuff, are worth 12%, and the 2 studies, or etudes, are worth 6% each. So those like extra 2 pieces, aside from list A, B, and C, really don't contribute a ton to your overall mark. And then you have 10% each for ear test and sight reading. And a pass to 60. And over on the ABRSM side, they weight it a little bit differently. So the total marks are 150 instead of 100, and you need at least 100 marks to pass, which ends up being a pass of 66%. So it's actually a little bit more challenging to pass an ABRSM exam. Each of the different lists, list A, B, and C, are weighted equally with the ABRSM. They're each worth 30 points, which would be 20% of your overall mark. Technique is worth 14%, sight reading is worth 14%, then ear tests are worth the least for 12%. I just want to make one more note on the RCM syllabus. They have a giant song.
Если честно, да, я готов даже в долгах сидеть, чтобы просто покупать этих штук. Ну, по большому счету, но это невыгодно. Ну, наверное, может и выгодно. Ну, я тоже так мыслю. Да. Да. Но это некрасиво просто. Так не должно, да. А как у тебя вот жена будет, как ты будешь ее содержать? На шее у обидчик? У обидчики своей, да. В ее хате, да, да, потому что ты докажешь, что ты, да, достоин быть полным человеком, да. Ну, вот это вся херня, это все словеса. Важно, что ты мужик или не мужик, понимаешь? То есть, ну, хорошо, это просто мы опустим, да? Ну, гордость, шмордость, это все не важно, потому что с этим можно смириться. Я как человек, ну, как бы, инвалид, больной, да, ну, или как угодно. Да, он тебя понял. Смириться можешь, мужчина смиряется практически со всем, постепенно. Только самое главное, что для тебя, вот то, что для тебя свято, оно не должно быть. Вот с этим смиряться нельзя, если там какие-то проблемы. И оно находится в области мечтаний и работы и труда, понимаешь? Вот как Чайковский. И это очень опасное место, потому что тебе надо очень хорошо подготовиться. Ну, как бы, да, и хорошо работать, типа того. Потому что можно просто, да, взять и убить себя, или остаться, или быть бабой. Ну, что, в принципе, так, как бы, ни о чем. Да, тут тоже надо понять. Хотя, мне ли, знаете, это, не понимаю, это, ну, это так воспринимается, я так, по крайней мере, на мир смотрю. Люди, которые, да, мужики, которые так не проросли, скажем так, и не стремятся, да, и болеют потом, к сожалению. Возможно, самоинструкция тоже, да, понимаешь, потому что это неблаго, понимаешь, это нехорошо. И потом кто-нибудь придет, Путин придет, скажет, за бабки продайся, душу дьяволу отдай. Ой, да ладно, все уже похер, ладно. Пусть там, поесть-то хоть дашь, но мне что-нибудь, отдохну, хоть отдохнуть чуть-чуть. Это даже не шутка, это, знаешь, ты уже понимаешь меня, что ли? Ну, почти что понял уже, да, почти. Вот я тебе и говорю, да. Ну, выражаясь так, понимает он тебя, да. То есть ты и некому предъявить, потому что у тебя искра таланта, зерно, ты созидание какого-то, да, а ты отдыхаешь. То есть червяки не отдыхают, червяки вот так вот извиваются, то есть в природе, да. А ты живешь как червяк, будучи человеком, понимаешь. То есть, как бы, смеет центральную нервную систему и так далее, понимаешь? Поэтому червяки святые, а ты недостоин жизни, да, прости. Сам, да, что сказал, да. Прости, пожалуйста. Нет, нет, тут ничего, ну смотри, сам. Понимаете? Только вот с этим, да, ну смотри, тогда, да. Потому что еще есть такая штука. Ты как бы смиряешься, но это все понарошку. Ты здесь, короче, понты, здесь понты. А ты такой, сдулся, потому что у тебя ничего не надо, у тебя святое место пустое, понимаешь? Там черти налетели, и все, да, понимаешь? Все, и все у тебя, то есть, ну, понимаете, да, то есть, и потом еще хуже будет. Там сядут на тебя, и, да, бабы погонять будут там, и никуда ты не денешься, да. И так бывает очень часто, поэтому все, да, что, понимают, да. Да. Поэтому это единственное настоящее, и тут ты свободен полностью, да. Что хочу, то и делаю. Понял меня теперь, да. Что надо, то и делаю. Что надо мне, что надо, потому что я не могу хотеть то, что не надо людям, да. Да, понимаю, да. Ну да. Красиво, благородно, да, понимаю, да. Ладно, да. Все уже. Да. Нормально, то есть как бы все нормально, ну да, и это прямо сейчас всегда происходит. Да, это прям, да. Ну, это не пугалка, это просто. Да. Да. Нет, ну просто. Да ничего такого страшного нет, наверное. Как-то. Ну да. Ну, нужно лучше, чтобы зло-то не смиряться с тем, что вокруг тебя. Ну, или в тебе. С тем, что у тебя ничего святого нету. Потому что ты будешь делать? Если у тебя ничего святого, ты воевать вот туда пойдешь, да, в лучшем случае. Или в худшем, наоборот, да. Да, понимаете, да. Ну, потому что это трудно, да, понимаете. Ну ладно, ничего, постепенно. Нет, ну постепенно, ну ладно. Ну ладно. Ну согласен, да, что? Не знаю, к себе вопросы, у кого искать? Наверное, да. Таланты, не знаю, вспоминаю, не знаю, родные, близкие, не знаю. Надо будет все вспомнить. Ладно. Себе так, ладно, все. Да.
List of all the pieces you can play to grade
Ой,
4
да,
level,
я тебе говорю,
each
что это
category,
очень
like
сильно,
list
да,
A,
я
list
понимаю.
B, so on.
Смешно, но
Definitely check that out. If you want to, you can buy like the grade 4 RCM books, or if you're doing ABRSM, you can buy the grade 4 ABRSM books. And this is convenient because all the pieces are at the exact same level, so there's no guesswork. However, another route to go is to get the books that have these grade 4 pieces in them. These books often have a variety of pieces at all different levels, so maybe you really like Susan Alcon, you can check out her Wind Chimes collection, and that's going to have probably like 7 to 10 pieces in it,
семья, там,
and they're
близкие
going to be
отношения,
varying levels,
чтобы
but
тепло было у
probably
них в
all
душе и
in like
везде кругом,
intermediate
наверное,
phase.
чтобы по-настоящему
This
можно было.
leads to a more interesting piano book collection, so I
Ну
really
да,
like using this as a
чтобы
reference
чтобы
when
их
I'm looking
руках,
for new
да,
music to
понимаете,
check
ну
out.
что
Just something you might want to take a look at. So that's all for today's overview video. And in the next video, I'm going to share with you some of my favorite grade 4 piano books, so you can stay tuned for that if this is, if you're around this level, if you want to get into grade 4 music and stuff like that. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up if you did. You can subscribe if you haven't already. And then you can go hop on my social media. You can check them out on the cards at the end of this video. And visit me on Patreon if you feel like it. And in the description bar below, you can also come and check out the blog post where all of these lists and stuff will be posted for you to just kind of have for reference. Anyway, catch you later.
Ну, наверное, что-то печальное происходит с ними, когда
I don't let that yawn free.
Ладно, не суть. Да. Ну я так только считал. Что там такое? Что там такое? Адвокатов надо есть. Знаешь, что это? Похож на Прокофьев, да? На Серегу похож, да? Эти меня что, хватит начинают. Спокойно живите. Ты слышишь, да, это? Венгрия.
Волшебные пейзажи, бесконечный покой и отдых. Венгрия и зимой гарантируют вам незабываемые впечатления.
Добро пожаловать на маркет Теле2. Здесь наши абоненты друг другу минуты и гигабайты могут продавать и покупать.
Теперь каждый купленный гигабайт ждет 2.
Их там, ну, может быть,
Их давно уже нет. Уже 3
Ну,
года
как нет? Ну как нет, когда мы
Просто нет.
Мы вот в прошлый раз в этой студии, вот, это чей флаг? Это что,
Флаг,
украинский
да,
флаг?
но нету националистских. Уже давно расформировали.
Ну понятно,
Флаг,
это
да.
Белецкому скажи. Да, понятно.
Нет
Вот
их.
в этом танке сидят, конечно, там какие-то
Военные.
домохозяйки.
И батальона Азов тоже нет.
Да, это часть украинской армии.
Вот
Давно
они,
нету
вот
националистов.
они могут устроить провокацию. Они могут устроить провокацию, и это будет самое неприятное, потому что республикам, естественно, придется отвечать. А любой конфликт имеет тенденцию развиваться по спирали, и вот тогда нам придется, наверное, вмешаться. В этом неоднократно.
Смотри,
говорил
кстати, вот
президент.
возраст человека, да, помнишь, когда тебе там, ну, год-два было, да, тоже как спираль получается, да? То есть, потому что вот 1 сантиметр в начале спирали и 1 сантиметр в середине и 1 сантиметр в конце спирали, там, да, понимаешь? То есть это как бы разные совсем сантиметры, понимаешь, да? Ну, я понял уже, да. Да. То есть делаешь такую проекцию на тот сантиметр, который там, да, то есть вообще несопоставимо, там такое вот получается, да, понимаешь? Ну, да. Ну что, нет уж света. Поэтому, наверное, да. Ну ладно. Тушит свет уже.
И так, но хотелось бы, конечно, этого избежать. И я очень надеюсь, что сегодня в Париже советники о чем-то договорятся.
А вы имеете в виду, простите, что я перебил, когда говорите вмешаться с сапогом, да, прийти туда?
Не
Потому
обязательно
что
сапогом. Нет, не обязательно
сейчас
сапогом.
уже речь идет об вооружении.
Ну,
То есть мы сможем
вооружение-
сажать те же самые байрактары,
Ну,
мы сможем
Пушилин правильно
противодействовать
сказал,
другим
что
системам.
Им нужна защита, собственно, от воздуха. Это средства ПВО, может быть, средства РЭП. Я не буду фантазировать.
Это радиоэлектронная борьба.
Да, радиоэлектронная борьба – это действительно прерогатива Генерального штаба, Верховного Главнокомандующего. Будет принято решение, мы будем, так сказать, уже совершенно очевидно знать.
Такое решение, по-вашему, оно погасит напряжение или, наоборот, разожжет конфликт?
Вы знаете, трудно сказать. Оно, с одной стороны, придаст уверенности, конечно, республикам, но, с другой стороны, это может открыть, так сказать, шлюзы для еще больших поставок вооружения на Украину. Поэтому я лично не берусь однозначно утверждать, что это было бы стопроцентно в нынешней обстановке, так сказать, естественное решение. Но решать президенту, поэтому я думаю, что он примет правильное решение. Теперь я еще раз повторяю, хотелось бы верить, что сегодня в Париже все-таки, тем более, что американцы обещали, что Байден обещал Путину, что он заставит, уговорит, или я не знаю, какое там слово было употреблено английское, убедит украинскую сторону все-таки выполнить Минские соглашения, по крайней мере,
Единственный, кто выдавит.
Это уже не раз.
первую часть. Речь идет о первых 3 пунктах. Это прекращение огня, отвод тяжелых вооружений. Это
И отвела уже давно.
ну, конечно. Вот, поэтому посмотрим. И что касается вот ответа Байдена, я думаю, что это будет, я так предполагаю, что это будет не просто ответ Байдена Путину, это будет консолидированный ответ Запада на наши предложения. И это будет не ответ на поставленные вопросы по пунктам, как нам хотелось бы, аргументированные ответы по каждому пункту наших предложений, а это, скорее всего, будет, так сказать, перечень встречных озабоченностей коллективного Запада.
Ты дурак, сам дурак.
Нет, не ты дурак, сам дурак. Ну, в частности, вот сейчас я говорю, вот в экспертной среде это очень широко сейчас обсуждается. Вот, например, там статья 4 основополагающего акта, который упомянут в наших предложениях, да, там речь идет о том, что стороны обязуются не размещать дополнительные, существенные вооруженные силы на территории стран новых членов. Но мы требуем, чтобы в соответствии с этим пунктом все, скажем так, формирования, которые были размещены на территориях новых членов после 1997 года, были выведены.
Военный оркестр могут оставить.
Военный оркестр, ну да, наверное. Но Запад считает, хотя это и не прописано напрямую, но они считают, что этот пункт 4 относится и к нашей стороне. Поэтому, несмотря на то, что Россия брала просто обязательства по сдержанности в Калининграде, в Псковской области, они считают, что мы должны тогда вывести все свои вооруженные силы, скажем так, из Абхазии, Южной Осетии. Ну,
чтобы их съели с потрохами?
Нет. Ну, это другое дело, но они считают, что это их озабоченность. Я просто вам говорю, что сейчас обсуждается вот в западном экспертном сообществе. Для нас это неприемлемо.
Сигналы очень противоречивые приходят, потому что Нед Прайс сегодня прокомментировал ситуацию и сказал, что мы не удивим Россию, ничего там такого не будет, что вы не видели ранее. С другой стороны, Госдепартамент буквально за несколько минут до нашего эфира выпустил сообщение о том, что нет даже причин для того, чтобы передавать Украине план вступления в НАТО.
Все правильно.
В обозримом будущем.
Поэтому обсуждается идея моратория от 5 до 25 лет, обсуждается вопрос, так сказать, госдоговора по типу Австрии. Очень много вариантов, лишь бы не принимать на себя юридические обязательства по отказа от политики открытых дверей.
Тем не менее, каждая из сторон ставки очень и очень сильно повысила к сегодняшнему дню. CNN про размещение дополнительных войск в Европе.
США и ряд их союзников ведут переговоры о размещении дополнительных тысяч военнослужащих.
Малер, знаешь, такой чувак был? Господи.
Good evening. Good evening, and thank you all for coming out here for our next installment of the Evening at Egan series. Tonight we have Mahler, Modernism and Resurrection, presented to us by QIWI-Pickett, the music director of the Juno Symphony, and Robin Walls, Associate Professor of History here at UAS. And I don't know how much introduction they need, but I will give it. Kyle Pickett has been described as one of America's most exciting and charismatic young conductors. He holds a doctorate of music. He holds a doctorate of musical arts conferred by the Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore, and was appointed music director of the Juno Symphony in the year 2000. He's also the music director of the North State Symphony in Northern California, so we're very lucky to be sharing him. Over the past 9 seasons, he has fostered the Juno Symphony and has brought it to a new level of artistry, and has also introduced the popular Conversations with the Conductor series of pre-performance talks. And if any of you have been fortunate enough to hear any of them, you know what an engaging speaker Maestro Pickett is. It's an honor and a pleasure to work with him, and I say this as a singer in the Juno Symphony Chorus. So, his co-presenter tonight is Robin Walls, who earned his PhD in history at the University of California in Davis, and teaches many history courses for us here, including histories, history surveys, modern history surveys and others, and upper division courses that include European intellectual history, history of the Holocaust, and European popular culture. His book, Pulp Surrealism, Popular Culture in Early 20th Century France, was published by the University of California Press in 2000. He's published many other essays and articles on what he calls French criminals, detectives, and avengers. And this includes an introduction to the classic 1911 crime novel Fantômas, which is translated in English now. He has also translated a surrealist crime parody called The Death of Nick Carter from French into English, and it's really good. You should find it and read it. And Robin Walls plays the cello in the Juno Symphony. And so without further ado, I will turn this evening over to the dynamic duo. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Nina. I mentioned on the radio last night, thinking of this evening in baseball metaphor. It's it's playoff time. So we're in the 8th inning here, and I'm the setup man, and then Kyle's going to be the closer. Let's see here. We'll get going here. I want to start off tonight just taking a couple minutes to talk about how my prelude, my encounter, my own personal encounter with hearing Mahler's Second Symphony, the symphony I'll be doing next weekend for the first time. And I was living in San Francisco at the time. I think it was 1986. And Herbert Blumstedt was the conductor of the San Francisco Symphony at the time. And this woman down here is named Susan McCarthy. She was a friend. And she was singing in the chorus. And she was telling me about this. And she says, we're doing Mahler's second. You really got to come. And I said, yeah, I would. And it was Sunday afternoon. It was around noon or so. And I realized if I didn't hop on the bus and make it to Davies Hall, I wasn't going to hear it at all. This was it, the matinee. It was the last chance. And so I rushed, I got in, everybody was already seated. I'm running, I'm up in the nosebleed section. I'm having to run up all those flights of, ramps and stuff. And the ushers let me in. Luckily the music hadn't started yet, but and I sit down and just in time for the symphony to start, and I had one of those Pavlovian responses of being when I was a student and I'd go to concerts, which is I'd go in and I instantly fall asleep, and or it's not really you fall asleep, it's you kind of fade in and out. I don't know if you've had that experience in symphony, and you just kind of get caught up in this dream thing, and then it's a really long symphony, and then at a certain point, this works. Oh no. Wakes me up, it wakes me up. It's the beginning of the 5th movement. And in the 5th movement, there's a lot of loud and then softs and other things like this. And then I'm kind of, my dream state has become kind of like a state of awareness at a certain point. And then there's this certain point, and this is going to be super soft, so we have to be really quiet. Really quiet, it's not playing. Okay, I'll just tell you about it. You'll get it for yourself. You'll get it from Kyle too, which is, there's this point in which the chorus comes in. And everything's been so loud, and the chorus came in, and it was so soft. And I just completely came apart. I just started sobbing right in my seat in the thing. And those of you who know me, I'm not a particularly effusive person. I mean, I get chastised for being like all head, and you know, well, there's a heart there somewhere, but I don't wear it on my sleeve. And what I realized, and the point was, where I'm going with this story, is that I didn't even know this symphony was called the Resurrection Symphony. And there I am totally caught up in what's going on in this piece of music. I had no idea what I was going to, and at this moment, it happened. It completely happened for me. And this is where I'm going to go with the modernism. I'm going to talk, Mahler had his effect on me. That's what I'm trying to say. And he did it not because I knew what I was going to, not because I didn't understand any of the words, I couldn't even tell what the words were that were being sung, and yet the effect was total and it was complete. Now, I've got 3 sets of slides here to go through, and I want to talk about Mahler's biography a little bit first, then I'm going to give you a really, really kind of quick version of what modernism is, and then wrap up with the sort of connections between Mahler and modernism, or some of them that I came across that I like very much. Gustav Mahler was born in July of 1860 in the town of Iglau. It's in Bohemia, then called Bohemia. He was the second of 14 children born to Bernard Mahler and Marie Hermann. His father had been a coachman, but he saved up and became the owner of his own small off-sales distillery. His mother was burdened by housework and her multiple pregnancies. 8 of their children died in infancy or in early childhood. She was also abused emotionally, if not physically, by her husband, definitely emotionally. Now, Bernard's influences on Mahler, first of all, Gustav detested his father for being abusive toward his mother. He never forgave him for that. He, even as late as April 1910, in his famous stroll with Freud, the time that he spent 4 hours with Freud on a walk, and complained about his father, and the way, and his father's abuse toward his mother. But his father also positively instilled him with a love of the German language and culture. At this time, Bohemia was part of a vast Austrian empire, which was a multi-ethnic and multilinguistic conglomeration of peoples that today make up the countries of the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and there were also multiple ethnic communities in addition of Poles, Ukrainians, Romanians, Italians, Jews, and Roma Gypsies. Okay, so you have all these peoples and cultures. The ethnic roots of the Mahler family were in the local Jewish community, and Bernard was an active member of it, yet he was a secularized Jew. He prided himself as a liberal, free-thinking intellectual, preferring urban German language and philosophy to the rural Czech culture of the region where they were located. As a child, therefore, Gustav was raised speaking German as a first language, although he also received an Orthodox education. And he also developed a love of folk poetry, particularly the anthology Des Knaben Wunderhorn, which we're going to hear about more, the youth's magic horn. And Mahler would later rework some of those simple poems into his early symphonies, including the alto solo of the 4th movement of the 2nd symphony. In adulthood, however, like his father, Mahler would come to think of himself primarily as a modern, as a composer, conductor, artist, and intellectual, more than someone who sought roots in any particular ethnic or cultural tradition. Bernard's also the one who introduced Gustav to music, bringing home a pianoforte, an early version, a parlor version from the 19th century that Gustav had discovered in his grandparents' attic, and then his father arranged for him to have music lessons. By age 4, Gustav had mastered scales and the keyboard, but his father wanted him to be a virtuoso, like Mozart. At age 10, Gustav gave his first public concert, which was well received, enough so that his father arranged for him to attend music conservatory in Prague. Although his musical progress there was slow, unremarkable, but then the next part happens. He has some formative musical influences when he enters the Vienna Conservatory in September 1875. In Vienna, he found himself being instructed by some of the finest music teachers in Vienna. He received piano lessons from Julius Epstein, harmony he studied harmony with Robert Fuchs, I think, Rachel Fuchs, and composition by Franz Krenn. In addition to his conservatory studies, he attended university lectures on art, history, and music, most notably those by Austrian composer Anton Bruckner. And while he was never a pupil of Bruckner's, Mahler and some of his conservatory colleagues were sort of befriended and adopted by Bruckner. He spent time with them and had a big influence on them as a result. Upon completing conservatory in 1878, Mahler joined the Pennersdorfer Circle, which was an intellectual and political group of young people under the intellectual sway of Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and above all, Richard Wagner. The notion of German musical genius embodied in Bruckner and Wagner appealed greatly to Mahler, and it furthered his trajectory towards secularization, assimilation, and modernity. Still, he was continually aware of his outsider status throughout his life. He was fond of saying, "I'm thrice homeless, as a Bohemian in Austria, an Austrian among Germans, as a Jew throughout the world, everywhere an intruder, never welcomed." Mahler also began composing during these years. He wrote something called a Nordic Symphony. We don't have it anymore. And his earliest
It's Thomas DeLauer, and we're going to break down the 5 best veggies for a ketogenic diet. Now, I've built this list based on specific criteria. Okay, we've looked at the net carb content, the fiber content, and the protein ratio. Then I also look at convenience. How easy and attainable are these veggies? Is it easy to get them? Okay. Then, of course, we look at different antioxidant effects, but also effects on, well, the bowels, because quite frankly, you're probably eating veggies to try to go to the bathroom a little bit more and get some roughage. And on keto, we have to be careful with that. So we'll talk about asparagus, we'll talk about broccoli, we'll talk about some more obscure ones like chlorella and even fennel, but very strategic uses of them. And then we'll also talk about how we can modulate our hormones and how we can control different things with these veggies. And then lastly, we'll finish up with one that's very, very widely used, but I'm not going to tell you till the end. All right, before we dive in, make sure you hit that red subscribe button and then hit that little bell icon so you never ever miss a daily video. Number 1 is going to be asparagus. Okay, asparagus is a 1-1-1 when it comes down to our net carb, fiber, and protein ratio. The reason that asparagus makes the list, however, isn't because it's low in carbs. Yes, it is. That's great. But it's easy to get. You don't have to get it organic. Okay, it's not one of those that you really need to find organic. But additionally, it's very high in something known as quercetin. Quercetin is a unique antioxidant, 6.5 times more powerful than vitamin C once it's in the blood plasma, once it's actually there. Now, what it does is it binds to reactive oxygen species. It binds to toxins within the body, but it also has an effect on what is called nuclear factor kappa B. What that is sort of the genetic kind of top level of inflammation. So it turns off or kind of mitigates inflammation from the top down, which is a very powerful thing when you're on a ketogenic diet. So we have to pay attention to that. But there's a very important thing you need to know about quercetin. Quercetin, once it binds with a toxin or binds with oxidative damage or oxidative stress, right? When it binds with a reactive oxygen species, it turns into quercetin quinone, which is toxic, and the body needs to then process that. In order to process this toxic byproduct of, well, toxic destroying, we need glutathione in our body, and glutathione needs methionine, which is a specific amino acid. So one of my recommendations is to always consume asparagus with a protein. Don't just consume it on its own, because then you could end up with an abundance of this byproduct toxin. Now, the proteins that you want to consume with it are going to be things like shrimp, crab, tuna, and actually turkey, believe it or not, even though I'm not the biggest fan of turkey, just because it's so high in methionine. So I just recommend pairing it with that so you get the most out of it. Now, if you're just looking for a big quercetin boost, it's not on the list, but capers, just fun fact, have the highest amount of quercetin of any green that's out there. Next up on the list is my personal favorite, which is broccoli. Out of it. Now, if you're just looking for a big quercetin boost, it's not on the list, but capers, just fun fact, have the highest amount of quercetin of any green that's out there. Next up on the list is my personal favorite, which is broccoli. That makes the list not